Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade and the new civilizations that were established by the Spaniards in South and Central America. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to answer the question, how did African slavery begin in the Americas? It started with the Spanish conquistadors. Conquistador is the Spanish word for explorers. Political and economic competition between European nations led to further exploration of the New World. Believing that North America had cities of gold, the conquistadors explored and conquered new lands. Hernan Cortez is going to be one of the main explorers that we focus on while we learn about New Spain. He sailed from Cuba to Mexico with about 600 soldiers and 16 horses in the year 1519. If you remember from our lesson about the Columbian Exchange, horses were not native to this land. So that random fact that's included there about 16 horses may not seem like a very big deal, but for the Native Americans who had never seen such a magnificent creature, it is going to play an important role in how Hernan Cortez interacts with the Native Americans. The Aztec ruler Montezuma believed that Cortez was a god and showered him with gifts. So we need a little bit of background information to figure out why in the world Montezuma thought Cortez was a god. So I'm going to read an excerpt from Oh Yikes, History's Grossest and Wackiest Moments. And we are going to be reading the chapter about, or reading an excerpt from Aztec Antics. One of the most beloved of the Aztec gods was Quetzalcoatl. To the people of Mesoamerica, he was like Jesus, a real person who 500 years ago, after his death, became someone to be worshipped and revered. Quetzalcoatl wore white feathers and was linked with the rising sun in the east. His return to earth from heaven had been foretold for hundreds of years. One of the stories of Quetzalcoatl's return said that a messenger with a beard the color of the sun would come to announce his arrival. So when Montezuma looked at the sky and saw a comet, and then saw islands floating towards him from the east, he got a little panicky. And when he saw the sun-colored beard of one of the pale-skinned people, the strange beasts they had with them, and their flaming fire sticks, he decided that Quetzalcoatl had indeed returned. Unfortunately, the Aztecs were in for the worst kind of surprise. The blonde-bearded man definitely wasn't Quetzalcoatl, and the floating islands were ships from Spain carrying soldiers dead set on conquering the New World. But Montezuma didn't know that, so he sent out a welcoming committee. It seemed like a good idea at the time, and an idea that quickly turned oh so bad. By the time Montezuma and his royal advisors figured out what the Spanish were up to, it was too late. Mighty Montezuma was taken captive and then set out to tell the Mexica that the Spanish were now in charge. So as you can see, Montezuma was a little bit deceived by the arrival of Cortez, and Cortez is going to eventually turn on Montezuma, making him a prisoner, which will eventually result in his death. This ended the great Aztec Empire that had existed in South America for several hundred years. Francisco Pizarro is another important Spanish explorer. He sailed down the Pacific coast of South America searching for gold. He later captured and killed the Incan emperor, causing the collapse of the Incan Empire, another grand empire that had been built and secure for many hundreds of years. Now let's talk about the relationship between the Spanish explorers and the Native Americans. If you look at this picture closely, you can see some major differences between these two groups of people. Looking at their weapons, we can see that these Spaniards are covered from head to toe in armor. They also have swords that are way more advanced than the weapons that the Native Americans are fighting with. You can see in the hand of the Native American that he just has a big stone. Not to mention that the Spaniards are riding on these gigantic horses that the Aztecs had never seen before. So even if the Native Americans were skilled warriors, their weapons and their tactics were no match to the weapons and the horses that the Spaniards brought when they came to conquer the new land. The Spanish conquered the natives due to their advanced military equipment, such as guns and steel armors. In the excerpt that we just read from the Oh Yikes book, it also mentioned fire sticks. Those fire sticks that it's referring to were the guns. The encomienda forced the Native Americans to work for or pay taxes to the Spanish. It was kind of like in the manor system where the serfs were living off the land and they also had to pay taxes. The encomienda were also having the people work off of the land and pay taxes as well. It was almost a kind of labor that, like a slave labor. Due to the forced labor, many Native Americans died, and the Spanish began to look to Africa for new laborers. So, a little background information of why the Spanish would even look to Africa in the first place. So, before exploration even began, Africa had already established an active slave trade with the Eastern Hemisphere. So when the Spanish ran out of Native Americans to work their land, they began trading resources with Africa in order to have African slaves come and work the land. And as we know with history, the African slave trade is going to greatly affect the economy of some of our early colonies. So we'll learn more about that as we get into the English colonies. Now, with the arrival of the Spaniards, it's going to cause a Spanish social class system. The Peninsulares were the colonists that were born in Spain. So we had two Spanish parents who had sailed across the Atlantic Ocean together, and they were called the Peninsulares. They were the pure-blooded Spaniards who were at the top of the social pyramid. Creoles are colonists that were born in America of two Spanish parents. So the two parents that sailed across the Atlantic and settled in South America, if they had their first child in America, that American born child was considered a Creole. Mestizos were people that were of mixed Spanish and Indian parentage. So basically, a Spaniard and a Native American ended up getting married and having children, and their children were called mestizos. And then the last group of people were of Spanish and African heritage. So a Spaniard getting married to an African, and then their children were called mulattoes. So that's how the social system was organized. The Peninsulares being at the top, followed by the Creoles, with the mestizos next, with the mulattoes at the bottom. Now, we can see how multicultural children were born in New Spain. But the social pyramid is actually missing a group of individuals. We were given a name that referred to the children that were born to Spanish and African parents, but what about the kids that were born to Native American and African children? Do some research. You're going to find out that there was, in fact, a group of children and what their name was. So, after you do your research, make a social pyramid and finish it off by adding this new group of individuals that existed in New Spain. Have fun, and I will see you guys tomorrow.